Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's Fireside Chat. We have a very special guest, Sonja Lyubomirsky. I was practicing it. I almost got it. I'm not the best at saying last names, but we are so excited to have her here because she's going to be talking about the science of happiness. Welcome, Sonja.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. You were very, very close. So Lyubomirsky means love and peace in Russian. Lyubovimir. So I've always hated my name because no one can pronounce it or spell it, but it's kind of appropriate for someone who studies the science of happiness.
Yeah, it is perfect. And I would love for you to share a little bit about your journey and how you got into like studying happiness. It's such a cool topic that you get to study all the time.
Yeah, it was really kind of serendipitous. So I got my PhD a long time ago at Stanford, and the very, very first day of grad school, I met with my advisor, and his name is Lee Ross, and he was the world's leading expert on conflict and negotiation. So kind of the opposite of happiness. So we took a walk around campus, and we ended up in the Rodin Sculpture Garden, and I remember him telling me how a great science, like a great psychology experiment is like a great sculpture. Like the more you look at it, the more you see in it, the more it tells you, the more you learn from it. And then one of us said, again, this was 35 years ago. One of us said, like, what's the secret to I don't know who said it. It was probably him. What is the secret to happiness? And why are some people happier than others? And so that's how it started. And so back then, there was only one person, Ed Diener, who founded the science of happiness, who was doing research on happiness. He didn't even call it happiness. He called it subjective well-being because he didn't think he could like study something so unscientific and fuzzy. So I remember being really insecure as a graduate student, as a young professor, because no one was studying it. It just was considered, as I said, like not scientific. And so, yeah, that's how it started, kind of serendipitously.
That's amazing. I love how like one question sparked this whole entire like path for you and path for many others. And how would you define happiness? Because I feel like a lot of people have many different definitions. Like from a scientific perspective, like what is happiness?
Yeah, it's a great question. And we could get into the debates about definitions, but I think they're not that interesting, actually, the debates. So I define happiness the way that researchers define happiness, which is that it really has two components. And the first component is experiencing positive emotions fairly frequently, right? So people who are happy experience joy, serenity, curiosity, affection, pride, not all the time, of course. And negative emotions are important too. They're signals for us that are important, but it's only when they're sort of chronic or really intense or acute that they're not healthy. So happy people experience fairly frequent positive emotions, but that's not enough. So that's like one component. The second component is basically having a sense that your life is good, that you're satisfied with your life, that you're satisfied with the progress that you're making towards your life goals. And so I like to think about these two components of happiness as being happy in your life and being happy with your life. So you kind of need both to be a happy person.
I really love that definition and it just reminds me of being like really content with your life and really, at peace with your life as well too. And the both in your life and with your life is something I never thought about. Like I think a lot of people think of like different moments of like, oh, I'm happy now, but they might not be happy in their life and they are afraid to make that transition. So how do you help people find more happiness, whether it's in their life or with their life, because I think some people might, like I said, be happy in one part, but not both.
Mhm. Interestingly, we've never found that certain interventions kind of help with one or not the other. Because it seems like that should be true, that there might be certain kind of behaviors or ways of thinking that would help you with just feeling more positive emotion and others with sort of more greater life satisfaction. But we haven't actually found that, so we kind of combine those when we measure happiness. And so basically the last like 25 years, I've been doing what we call happiness interventions. And incredibly, like no one did this before. Like now, there's lots of articles, videos about sort of these sort of happiness practices, happiness hacks. Um, and we've been studying them sort of systematically, scientifically, because your grandmother might tell you, oh, you should express gratitude to be happy, or you might have friends who are happy and you watch what they do, and you see what their habits are, and you might see like, oh, people who are happy tend to exercise more, or they meditate, or they are more forgiving, or they have stronger relationships. And so what we do in our research is that we actually systematically test those things to see if they really work. Kind of like if there's some kind of supplement people are taking, like, do we know that works? We need to have, clinical trials. So what we do basically are clinical trials. And nowadays everyone knows what a clinical trial is, right? So instead of testing like a vaccine or a medication, we test, does gratitude work? So like, is gratitude effective? And by the way, there's a difference between effectiveness and efficacy, it turns out. So is gratitude effective? Like, does it actually make people happier? Or does kindness effective? Doing acts of kindness, does that make people happier? But then there's other questions we can ask, like, what is the optimal dosage of kindness or gratitude? And should some people maybe not practice gratitude or kindness? And actually, that's an interesting question. Well, maybe I'll actually mention that today, because I haven't done the study yet, but it turns out that people who are, because of course the gratitude giraffes, are interested in gratitude. So there are people who are really depressed, who worry that they are a burden on their family and friends. In fact, feeling that you're a burden is a high risk factor for suicide. And so we actually thought about this a long time ago, that maybe expressing gratitude would be actually dangerous for people who are severely depressed. Because it's like, imagine you're really depressed, you think you're a burden, and we say to you, oh, well, why don't you write some letters to people in your life and think about all the different ways they've supported you, right? So it might actually make you feel like you're even more of a burden, right? And so that could be really, really dangerous. And so those are the kinds of questions that we ask, like, can there be situations where kindness or gratitude or meditation or whatever else we're studying might actually backfire, might actually be dangerous? Now, usually it's not. 99% of the time it's not, but sometimes it is. Should some situations or some people not practice it? And so that's what we do. We do randomized controlled trials where we randomly assign some people to practice some activities. And then we have various control groups, and then we follow people across time to see if that makes them happier. And also we look at other benefits. Does that make them feel more connected? I'd love to tell you about like how it gets under the skin. We also collect blood from people to see what happens to people's bodies when they practice some of these happiness activities too.
Wow, that's a lot of cool studies. And like there was like so many questions. I'm like Max too, because he was like, can you answer all those questions? Like we would love to know, first of all, like, is there a correlation of happiness and like the amount of kindness or the amount of gratitude? And then there's just so many other questions, but I'll just start there. I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
So sorry, but more about the gratitude
Oh,
aspect.
that about the study and like what you
Yeah.
found in the actual control test or the clinical test to see if there's a
Right.
formula for happiness.
Sure. And actually, by the way, I don't know why I said gratitude giraffes. I was like, that doesn't sound right. Grateful giraffes. Um, uh,
Forgiven. Forgiven.
I was saying, like, I'm like, that does not sound right. Gratitude giraffes. I don't know if you guys considered that name, Grateful Giraffes. Yeah. So actually, I probably did the first gratitude intervention like ever in 1998. And so where we ask people to count their blessings. So there's different ways of expressing gratitude. So there's now a whole field of research on gratitude. So you can ask people to count their blessings, like say once a week, right? Or several times a week or every day, write up to 5 things that you're grateful for. So that's one way, obviously. I mean, you all know this, but I'm just going to kind of review how scientists think about this. Some people call this keeping a gratitude diary. And then most of our studies, we ask people to write gratitude letters, which is more powerful than just like writing a list of, say, 5 things that you're grateful for. Because in a letter, it's much more rich, right? You can really put into detail, like some way that, for example, a person in your life, like your mom or your mentor, or your best friend, has really supported you, helped you. We've even done studies where we've compared like counting blessings, like writing a list, and or you can write a gratitude essay. It doesn't have to be about a person. It could be like, maybe like I've had a lot of like I'm an immigrant, and I can write about sort of all the opportunities that I've had in my life because of my parents chose to immigrate, and how lucky I am, basically how grateful I am for that. So it doesn't have to be to a person. And also gratitude could be social or not social. You could be grateful for your health, or you could be grateful to people. So we've actually done studies comparing these things because we thought that like social gratitude would be more powerful. And we actually did not find that. What we found that it was the same. Like, so you can express gratitude for whatever, like your health, or the world, I don't know, your neighborhood. It turns out what is more powerful is basically writing like a letter or an essay. So anything because it's richer than a list. We actually, not surprisingly, we're now collaborating with some people where we're using AI to help people express gratitude. And I think that's definitely like a huge direction. I'm not the first person to have thought about this. So we're already doing some studies where we're using, in one collaboration, this is at Stanford and Cambridge, where my collaborators who are computer scientists have created kind of like a version of like ChatGPT that is only for like gratitude. So it's actually helping people write gratitude letters, kind of asking them lots of questions like, so who are you grateful for? Like, tell me about them. And then they kind of write a letter for that person. And then we're doing a study, we haven't done it yet, to see if we send a letter with like using AI versus not, and like disclose it or not, like tell your, say, partner, I wrote this with the help of a bot versus not, like how does that affect their reaction to it? So we haven't done that yet. We're working on that now. So there's like so much to study in that area. People have done studies with kids and teenagers. By the way, I'm not able to follow the chat while I'm talking, but I mean, I assume you'll can read out some of those questions. Like it turns out that kids, teenagers, they kind of probably need gratitude even more than adults do. I mean, we probably have that sense, right? That like when we were younger, we sort of weren't as grateful as we are now. And we actually did focus groups with teenagers, and they admitted to us, they're like, we're not as great, like we're not that grateful. Like we really should be more grateful. And so we've done some work with like high school students. So yeah, anyway, I could go on and on, but maybe I could like let you direct the conversation.
These are all really fascinating. I love hearing about all the different methods for gratitude and how letters are so much more powerful. Max does have a follow-up question about if the gratitude essays are more powerful than social gratitude, because the Grateful Giraffes is a lot about social gratitude and being in community. So, what's the difference between a social gratitude versus a letter, and which one's better, or is it better for certain types of people as well? Is there a difference?
By the way, it's very likely that, well, I have a book that I wrote a long time ago called The How of Happiness, where I wrote about all of these issues. It's not really outdated now, but it's from 2008, but it's still true. Just that a lot more research has been done. And the theme of that book was fit, and this idea that everything I say, by the way, is about averages, and science is about averages. Like when you think about any kind of scientific or medical study, it's all about averages, right? Like this treatment works better than that treatment on average, right? So it doesn't mean that it's going to work better for you. Now, still, like if you're about to go into like a surgery and you have to choose between treatment A, B, C, you want to choose the one that works best on average, right? Because that's all you have to go on. But like with precision medicine or precision psychology, we hopefully will get to the point where we can kind of tailor, right, various practices to like the individual. So, and sometimes you sort of know for yourself, like some people will say, and actually there's some research on this, like they cannot like meditate. Like meditation does not work for them. And actually, I went to a talk that basically showed that it's kind of a bimodal distribution. Like for some people, it just does not work. And it was actually good to see that because because you hear all of this out in media, your friends, like, you really should do this, you really should do this. And some people just like, whatever, it doesn't work for them. And so that's true for pretty much anything. And so I think that's a really important, I guess, theme of what I'm going to talk about is that anything I say, there are going to be exceptions for different people. But all we can do with our studies is sort of see what works on average. So in terms of the Max's question, like social versus letters, so it turns out I guess what's most powerful is when you can like really think more deeply about something. And so when you write an essay or a letter, by the way, but letter doesn't have to be long. I mean, it could be just one paragraph. It doesn't matter whether it's social or non-social, is just going to force you to sort of think more meaningfully and deeply about something. And so even if you're thinking about like your health, right? If you think deeply about it, you're going to really like, yeah, feel genuine gratitude for it. So that's really the lesson of that research, that it's the importance of like really engaging with it sincerely, as opposed to just kind of like, if you kind of like just wrote a list of the people in your life you're grateful for, and it took you, 3 minutes to write the list, and then you go on with your day, like that's probably not going to make a big impact, unless you really think about that. Like you're taking a walk and then you think about those three people in your life that you're grateful for. So that's important.
That's so
Mhm.
yeah, that's such a like important point about like the depth of the gratitude. It's not the surface. It's like how deeply can you feel it in your body? How deeply can you feel it in your heart and your soul? And I would love to go into what you touched about earlier about the how it affects your blood molecules. I'm
Mhm.
guessing it's similar to the study what's his name? The water molecule guy, Dr. Emoto's
Uh,
study, like with water molecules, and like if you put words on there, it like changes the crystal. But I would love from a scientific perspective, like how does it affect your blood and your physiological being as well?
So there is no research yet that I know of gratitude and biology, kind of like how gratitude gets under the skin. I don't think there's any that I've heard of. So the research that we do is on kindness. So I can kind of go to that, which by the way, kindness and gratitude are very, very much related, as you might know, that when you're more grateful, it makes you more compassionate and kind to not just the person that you might be grateful for, but to sort of just people in the world. So they're really, really very much connected. And in fact, the theme of all my research is the key to happiness is connection, and it's really social connection, and that's the key to gratitude, because it makes you feel more connected. That's the key to kindness. That's the key to almost any kind of activity that we study. I mean, it's very few, even, I mean, I guess you could say like physical exercise or meditation or certain kinds of meditation might be like not necessarily connecting with others, but they almost always are, including that you might do them with other people. There's certain kinds of meditation, like loving kindness is like really about connection. But anyway, so let me talk about the biology studies, because I think they're really cool. So I have a collaborator who happens to be actually my ex-boyfriend from many, many years ago. He's a professor at UCLA, and he founded a field called social genomics. And what it is basically, I'm not sure if I can really describe it very well because I'm not a biologist, but he's a social psychologist, retrained as a biologist. He's an immunologist. He was a very good person to know actually during COVID, because he like knows everything about the immune system. But anyway, so what we do in our studies is we do these interventions where we ask people to do acts of kindness over the course of a month. So we could all try this. So for the next month, so let's say the month of July, every Monday, do 3 acts of kindness for others that you don't normally do. Okay, so every Monday, do 3 acts of kindness for others that you don't normally do, something over and above what you usually do. So that's for 4 weeks. So basically for the course of so every Monday for 4 weeks. So that's that main experimental condition, do 3 acts of kindness for others. And then we have a really great control condition, which is do 3 acts of kindness for yourself every Monday for the next month. Now, why it's a great control condition is that it's also positive, right? We know that's a good thing to do 3 acts of kindness for yourself. You could do self-care. You could treat yourself. By the way, that could be like having a piece of chocolate, getting a massage, sitting out in the sun. Not social things, just for yourself. And then we take blood from people before and after the month, right? So July 1st, July 31st, we take your blood, and we send the blood to my collaborator's name is Steve Cole, and he analyzes as they assay the blood for RNA gene expression. So basically what we find is that people who do acts of kindness for others show changes in their blood, basically show changes in their RNA gene expression associated with a healthier immune profile. This is all relative to people who do acts of kindness for themselves, or we have other control conditions too. So if you do acts of kindness for others, you show basically less pro-inflammatory gene expression. So So think more inflammation is bad, so, right? So you want less pro-inflammatory gene expression. We also have a study where we had some hint of more antiviral gene expression. So this is just that, this is not health. This is a biomarker, kind of a marker of health, but it's still cool to show that when we do acts of kindness, like something in our immune system basically changes to make it healthier, or that we think it's healthier. So that, and we'd like to do that with gratitude. We have not done those studies with gratitude. Right now we're doing the same with just being social, because we think that maybe one of the most powerful things about helping others is that it forces you to connect and engage with other people socially. And it could be that social connection is really the key. And it's not the kind part that's the key. I mean, kindness is definitely, and compassion really matter, but the social part is really, really important. So we actually, literally, one of my students is doing a study right now where she's asking people just to act more social, to act more extroverted in their daily life. And then she's collecting their blood before and after. And she's also looking at introverts and people who are shy to see if there's going to be a change. Maybe they benefit more, maybe they benefit less.
Wow, there's so much great research. I think a lot of us are like, oh, we're so curious about the results of the study and like how it impacts ourselves, and with the Grateful Giraffes as well too, helping this community as well. AJ also asked, and I think it's relevant to what we talked about. She asked, any insights or thoughts on Wim Hof's scientific studies on the use of breath to alchemize blood pH levels for emotional well-being? So going back to emotional well-being and
Mhm.
breath versus what you talked about with kindness, in those studies.
Right. So I don't know. I mean, there's some research on breath work. I really don't know it. I actually have a student right now, a new student who's really interested in studying these things systematically, because a lot of them just have not been done really systematically, or there's some research, but the studies aren't very well controlled, or like maybe very small sample sizes. So I just don't know. I know I think there's very little on biology. So, or if there is, they're just not very well done studies, and not because there's anything wrong with. I mean, we just need more research, right? So it just takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of time to do research. We need foundations, organizations, or government to fund them. There's actually an agency, part of our federal government, that agency of alternative and complementary medicine, that funds some of this research, like on yoga and breath work, but again, there's just very few studies, so I don't know them. My student is actually going to do, we're actually designing right now a study on chanting, and why is chanting like improve your well-being, improve your mood. It also it reduces stress, has some other benefits. Like, what is it about it? Is it because of like the synchrony or the repetition, the voice, the social part of it? So anyway, so we're working on that right now, but there's just very little work on that.
That's really cool because it's like what people in the spiritual community have known for years that really help them, but you're just like backing it up that it's actually like a physiological change and a scientific change. So I love how science is just, helping to spread this type of movement across or maybe legitimize it, because there is like data to back up what we've all felt ourselves in those experiences. So it's great work and research.
Absolutely. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. I mean, so with the happiness practices, again, like your grandmother, like people email me all the time, they'll say, everything you study is in the Bible. The Bible talks about gratitude, Bible talks about forgiveness, right? And I'm like, yeah, like these are kind of universal, quote, universal truths, but we still need to systematically test them, because sometimes like your grandmother's wrong, right? And sometimes there are these myths, or like as you were mentioning, that the things that people in the spiritual communities do, maybe some things are just placebo effects. By the way, nothing wrong with placebo effects. Placebo effects are very powerful. They're very real, but it's still good to know what part of that practice is purely placebo and what part is like, even if you don't kind of believe it works, you'll still, it's still work. I actually just saw a really, really cool a study on, so I also do a little bit of psychedelic psychology, social psychology. I'm trying to start a new field called psychedelic social psychology. And so, and I study MDMA, which is Molly or ecstasy, and how that fosters connection. And so there's a study that was done that basically showed how much of MDMA is just a placebo effect and how much of it is real. Like, it was actually really cool graph. I'm like, oh my God, like you could kind of measure this much is real and this much is placebo. And that's actually true for pretty much anything. Whether it's a drug or an activity, just including gratitude, right? Like if I think that, writing gratitude letters is going to make me a happier, more connected person, like it probably will, on top of it actually has like a substantive kind of concrete effect, even if I don't really believe it's going to make me happy.
Yeah, it's like the power of our mind and intention as well too, coupled with the actual practice. Our mind is so incredibly powerful for us to experience, like you said, the placebo effect when it's just the power of the mind versus the actual thing that we're utilizing. I would love to talk a little bit more about you know, we talk about the happiness, but you were talking about there's other feelings and they're very valid as well too. And so I think when we talk about just pure happiness, sometimes people bypass that, they bypass their feelings. And so it's like the false positive or positivity. Like, how do you help people navigate their feelings? Because some people I've encountered, they're like, oh, I don't want those negative feelings because it'll put me in a spin or it will like bring my energy down or I'm not going to be in high vibe. So what do you say to people when they are trying to bypass their actual feelings to just try to stay in a high vibrational, high happiness state?
Right, right, right. No, really, really great points. And in fact, I think there's some misunderstanding of scientists like me who study happiness. People think that we're kind of like happyologists, and we think we should all be happy all the time, and absolutely not. So, I mean, there's so much to say about that. First of all, happiness doesn't mean like rainbows and kittens and smiles, right? And people who are happy don't necessarily even look happy, right? So you could be just like really engaged in your work or in your hobbies, and that's happiness, right? Just like being really engaged or connected to people. And of course, like I sort of alluded to this at the beginning when I defined what happiness is, that negative emotions, as we know, are really powerful data, right? They're important signals for us. And when you go back to sort of evolutionary theory, right, that negative emotions have really important evolutionary functions, right? So we need to sometimes be afraid to prepare us for something in the future or to run away. When we see an injustice, it's important for us to feel angry, right? And that motivates us to do something about that. And sadness is a signal that something is wrong in our life or in the world, and that we need to sort of focus on it. It's only when those emotions really become like, yeah, as I mentioned, sort of chronic or acute, that they really become kind of dysfunctional. They're not really helping us achieve anything because we're just sitting around and sort of being sad and angry all the time. And so for the first actually 10 years of my career, I did research on something else that you may not know about, which is on rumination. And rumination is basically this like cyclical kind of passive dwelling like over and over again on your sadness or on your anger or whatever, or on your anxiety, on things that are bad. And that's something that's like, it's not useful. It's not problem solving. Problem solving is like going from A to B to C to D. And those negative emotions are important to feel to help us sort of understand like what's going on. But rumination is like going from A to B, back to A, back to, it's just kind of going in circles, and it doesn't lead to anything. So that's something I wanted to make sure that I say, that negative emotions sort of are important unless they become sort of chronic and they sort of go in circles. But what you said, Minling, about the importance of letting the emotions sort of pass through you. I just went to a really cool conference in Santa Monica, actually, on where there are a lot of talks and sessions on spirituality, and they had all these free books. It was great. I love conferences. They just give you all these free books. And one of them was a book about spirituality by Sada Simone, called Spiritually We. And I read it. So I just like went home and read it. And there was a lot that I think I've already known before, but it was just sort of good to review. And it was a lot about kind of like letting the emotion go through you, right? Like to sort of release and let the emotion flow through you, but to drop the story about it, right? Because what we do is we like create these stories about the emotions. Oh, well, this means I'm unworthy, or this means this is bad things happening. So it was like release the emotion, drop the story, release the emotion, drop the story, release the emotion, drop the story. It's like you sort of say that to you or yourself over and over again. And that really affected me. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that more. So anyway, yeah, absolutely. We should not be feeling happy emotions all the time. That's not healthy either. Yeah.
That's great. I love that. Drop the story, drop the emotions, and like just really fully just let it go because it is all stories. I learned a long time ago that we're meaning making machines and we can make anything mean anything that we want and to not have so much focus on that. I would love to go back to the part about you said, happy in your life and happy with your life and how it relates to purpose. Because I think a lot of people, especially in this community, are searching for the purpose, searching for what it is they want to do. And sometimes when they don't have it, they might not be happy in their life. So, how do you feel, or what are the effects of purpose on happiness?
Mhm. So, yeah, really good question. So the two components of happiness that I was talking about, right? Happy in your life, like just emotions versus happy with your life. So purpose is related to the happy with your life. So people who say that they're satisfied with their lives are also say that they have more meaning and purpose. And by the way, meaning in terms of meaning versus purpose, researchers usually talk about meaning as something more like present or past, and purpose is more future oriented. But you could argue with that definition too. And so let's just talk about purpose then. And so I guess I would say that, yeah, so happiness, like in terms of feeling good, happiness is that feeling good part of it, or feeling satisfied, which feels good. And purpose doesn't necessarily have to feel good, right? So you can have a purpose that's really hard, right? That's something really hard that you're doing. And so some of that might be, as I said, like it might be challenging. So you're not necessarily like feeling great, like in terms of happy. But I guess the bottom line is it feels good to have purpose, right? And it feels good to have meaning. And so I don't tend to draw like a big distinction between those two things because they almost always go together. So happiness and purpose happiness and meaning usually go together. Now we can think of some examples, like Mother Teresa is like the sort of example people bring up. Like she's someone who had a lot of meaning and purpose, but was depressed. And it turns out we actually know now that she was actually clinically depressed, which is a disease. But that's pretty rare. Like people who have a lot of purpose also tend to be happy people. It doesn't mean that you're happy all the time. So again, let's get back from, it doesn't mean that when you're a happy person doesn't mean you're happy like all day long. So I might be like, I don't know, a doctor treating, like treating people who live in poverty and who don't have health care. And so that might be really hard and, really hard to do. So I'm not like happy every moment, but maybe when I come home, I feel really good about myself and I feel good about what I've done that day. So that's sort of how it goes together.
Well, that's really fascinating about, purpose and meaning and also Mother Teresa, how she was doing like her life's purpose, but she was still depressed. And I think there's also people that feel that way if they like are really good at something, but they don't feel, I guess, fulfilled. Like, how would you help people through that and um and guiding people towards their happiness if they feel like they're doing something purposeful, but it's not fulfilling for them and it's not
Mhm.
making them happy.
Interesting. I guess, yeah. I mean, I'm not a therapist, so I guess I'd be interested to try to understand why it's not making them fulfilled. Well, I'll talk about one thing. I have another book called The Myths of Happiness, and that is really about the situation when you have like a big goal in your life and you achieve it, or you're sort of achieving it, but then it doesn't make you sort of as happy as you thought it would. So maybe that's a situation that you're talking about. And part of it, sometimes it's like you're like, okay, I've made it, now what? Like, or so what? Um, um, and that happens. And there's a phenomenon called hedonic adaptation. And basically, it's this phenomena that human beings are like, we're very good at adapting or sort of getting used to changes in our lives, especially positive changes, especially successes, right? So we have this goal, we're So let's say we want to run a marathon at a certain time, or we want to, whatever, get into a certain school, or we want to start a company, or we want to have a baby, and we like really, really want those things. And then we finally achieve them. We work really hard to achieve them. And then we finally achieve them. And at first, like we're really happy. And we're happy at first, but that happiness doesn't last. And it doesn't last as long as we think it would. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't have these important, significant goals, and that those don't make us happy, but they often just don't make us as happy as we think they will. Like we think like, oh, if only I had XYZ, if only I had a baby, and if only I had a boyfriend, and if only I moved to that city where I always wanted to live, and if only I had that house and that job, right, then I would be happy. And that way of thinking just does not work, because generally once we achieve those things, we're like, oh, well, now I want more, right? So now I have that, but now I want this other thing. Now, you could argue this is actually evolutionarily adaptive, that if human beings kind of were like happy with like achievement of their goals, then we would all be sort of stagnant, right? We would just kind of like be like, great, I've achieved these three things. I'm just gonna like relax and not do anything else for the rest of my life, right? So we wouldn't make progress if we were constantly like a little dissatisfied. We need to be a little dissatisfied to sort of want more. We're always wanting more and more. But the problem with that is that it's an enemy of happiness, right? So it's hard to be happy when you're never like satisfied very long after you achieve your goals. So what do we do with that? And so I and others have sort of tried to sort of study this and talk about it. It's really, really hard. Like, how do you prevent or slow down hedonic adaptation? And it's really hard. But it happens to everything, including like you buy a new car. And at first you're so excited about your new car every time you get into it, or you have a new relationship, but then you kind of adapt. And the way you slow it down is by basically with novelty, variety, surprise, and gratitude, actually, it turns out. That's one of the secrets. So basically we adapt to constant circumstances. So like, let's say you buy a new house, or you have a new job, or you have a new relationship, and then it kind of stays the same, or the car, right? Which almost by definition is going to kind of stay the same. And then you adapt, right? You don't notice anymore, because humans notice changes in their environments because it's adaptive for us to notice change, because that change might be a source of food or a new mate or a predator or a threat, right? But when things are the same, we don't notice them anymore, right? So we need change is really the answer. So if you're in a new relationship, or you're in a new job, or you have a new car, like, or a new house, like use it in ways that creates novelties or opportunities or growth or change, which is probably why like jobs that are really dynamic, like entrepreneurs actually tend to be happier, because they're always doing new things. Academics like me, like are pretty happy too, because we always can do new research, right? We don't have the same job we're doing like over and over again. Yeah, if you have a new house, like have parties, like do things with the house that introduce. So social life by definition is like dynamic and involves a lot of change. So, and then gratitude, I'll get to gratitude. So with the grateful giraffes. So gratitude is an antidote to hedonic adaptation. Does that make sense? So gratitude is an antidote to hedonic adaptation, because hedonic adaptation basically is taking things for granted, right? It's like, again, that new relationship, the new job, that whatever new that you really wanted, now you have it, and you start taking it for granted. And when you express gratitude for something, you're basically saying like, I'm not going to take this for granted. Like, I'm going to really notice it, take note of it, attend to it, and be like, no, I have this thing that I've been taking for granted, and I'm now going to, right, like really feel true gratitude for it. Right.
Wow, that was really powerful, and it's just a testament to like gratitude and why it's such an important practice. And I was talking to my friend recently, and she used to live in Marina Del Rey, and she was telling me, she was like, every single time I move into a new place, I'm really excited, and then I just don't even see it anymore. It's like I was like right on the water, and it wasn't until like I moved away that I like appreciated it when I come back. And that's speaking to what you just said there. And I didn't know that was like a thing, but it is like so true. We just take things for granted and we just stop looking at it. So I love the fact that you can spice it up, keep it new, like maybe redecorate, or do something, go on a good road trip with your car. And there's just like so many things that I didn't even think about that.
Right. Some
um,
people are worse than others, right? Like we all know
yeah.
people who are like constantly like right, upgrading whatever, whether it's their phone or their car or like their job. They're constantly like bored with their job or their girlfriend, right? Like new novelty. And right, so some people are worse than others, and some of us are better than others, but we all need to put effort into, like, as you say, like slowing that down. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so important. And one of the things that I was curious about is, well, let me go back. What you said was also like those are external things to make us happy. If I get the car, if I get the husband, if I get the baby, if I get the house and all the stuff, how do we source that internal like happiness then? Like, where is that coming from? Is it strictly from being like grateful and like appreciative of what we had, not taking it from granted? Or is there another way to source that internal happiness so that, the external, regardless of the situation, regardless of where we are, will still maintain that happiness?
Yeah, great question. But I'm just like looking at the chat just to see if I missed something. I mean, it's sort of a cliche, right? That like happiness is not something outside of you, it's something inside of you. And everything that we're studying in our research, like how to be more grateful, to be more kind, to be more social, really is about what you can do. Basically, and I guess I should have reviewed this from the beginning because it's kind of a big picture. So part of happiness is genetic. So we know there's genetic influences on happiness. We know some of us are just happier than others. And that's true for any human trait, right? Some people have whatever, more neurotic, and some people have higher blood pressure, or that's just true for anything human, basically. But and some happiness is related to our life circumstances, right? So and some much worse than others. If we're in an abusive relationship, if we live in poverty, if we live in a country where there's a lot of instability, uncertainty, or war, like we're going to be unhappy pretty much no matter what. But then the rest is up to us, right? So like it's what we can build and control, and by like, as you say, kind of what's internal, what we can through the ways that we act, through the ways that we think about our lives and about ourselves. And so we have a lot of control over that, although it's not easy. So that's that internal part. Like we can choose to be more social, to be more grateful, to savor more, like to be more forgiving, to like choose a goal that matters to us and follow it, right? So it's up to us, although it's not easy. So another way I like to sort of summarize this is this research on what's called extrinsic goals and intrinsic goals. So extrinsic goals are money, beauty, fame, power. What else? Money. I feel like there's a fifth one. So basically, these are things that we all follow. Like even you might say like, oh, I don't care about these things, but like we all kind of care about like just living in our society. And it turns out having them is actually not a bad thing, but it's pursuing people who are pursuing like wealth, beauty, fame, power, popularity, influence. They're less happy than people who are not pursuing it. So it's kind of interesting. Having it is good, but pursuing it is not good. So what does make people happy is pursuing what are called intrinsic goals. And intrinsic goals, the way that I like to summarize them, is there are really three types of intrinsic goals. Anything to do with connection. So anything to do where you connect with other people, one. Two, anything to do with contribution, which is basically like helping, whether it's a friend or the planet. And three is personal growth. So anything to do where you can really grow as a person, whether it's learning something. So connection, contribution, and growth. Those are intrinsic goals. So pursuing those things, and those are like those intrinsic, internal things that make us happy. Pursuing the external things don't make us happy, or maybe even can make us less happy.
That makes sense because again, we're looking outside of what we can control, and I feel like we're in the age of influencers, and you're always comparing yourself to other people. It's like, oh, they have more followers, or they're doing this and that, and versus internal, you're the metric. You're only like if you improve with yourself, then you're growing as well too, and that creates that happiness because you can
Exactly.
see that movement.
And we know this, but we still do it. Like, so yeah, this is and we can talk about, social media and sort of devices and screens and how that has made things some ways better, but in more ways worse, right?
Yeah, let's do
So,
it. I would love for that to be part of the conversation
sure,
because
sure.
I mean it's part of our everyday life and how we can. I guess, manage our happiness in spite of all the social media and all the stuff that we just talked about.
Right. So screens, or I guess I'll call it digital media because that includes all kinds of, includes social media, but it just also includes just like using your phone. So digital media, I mean, first you have to acknowledge that there's lots of great things about it. I guess I would say digital media is like money, is that it can make you happy if you use it right, right? So like if you spend money on growing as a person or connecting with others or contributing to the world, right, that's going to make you happy than if you spend money on like bigger items in your garage or your shelves, right? Just that don't really make people happy. So obviously, like there's just so many ways that we can connect with others, like through our devices and through social media that we haven't been able to before. Or if you have a rare, whether it's a medical condition or hobby, right? Or you have family, across the world, like well, here's an example. I've always had au pairs for my kids. We've had au pairs for 24 years. We just actually let our au pair go last month. And they've almost, most of them have been from Germany. And for the first like 10 years, they were always so homesick. And it was really hard for them to adjust because they all came from another country. And then they just like stopped being homesick completely. Like they like from day one, they were fine. And it was because of, WhatsApp, right? It was because of social media. They were able to connect with their friends and family like multiple times a day. But it also, as you all know, I don't have to say this to you, it creates so many bad things as well. And it's really young people that are more affected by it. So people who, and one of my friends, John Haidt, who's a colleague, wrote a book called The Anxious Generation that some of you might know about. It's a bestseller right now. And it's about how harmful it is to people they've known nothing else, right? So those of us who are older, who've grown up without devices, like we kind of know how to connect in person. And so we use our devices sort of to supplement, right, our life as opposed to sort of that is our life. And so he talks a lot about how it's sort of replaced, in-person time. It's set people back. So for example, 12th graders today basically look like 8th graders like 20 years ago. So they're just like, they're like 4 years behind, maybe even more. And they're socializing a lot less. And then of course there's all this comparisons that happen, as you already mentioned. There's FOMO. But all of these things we can, we can do something about, right? Like we can, but researchers really do worry about kids who like that's all they've known, right? So they just haven't sort of learned how to connect in person as well as like older people have.
Yeah, it's so true. Like, I have a lot of friends that like don't limit the screen time or they don't give phones out to like the kids because they're just like sucked right in. Versus like when we were little, like we went out and played and had friends and like we're able to experience life and create our own happiness. That way. Max has a question that I thought was interesting. He says, people who use their money to help others feel happier. Humans want to be happier. How do so many people with money who are suffering not see this opportunity? Are they just trapped in a cycle of indulgence? And are there studies on why people just try to like get more and have, that be the means for their happiness and
Mhm.
using external means?
This is like the kind of the $1 billion question, right? So there's so many things that seem like obvious. I mean, I'll just take like diet and fitness, right? Like we all know that if we eat healthfully and if we exercise, we're going to be fit and healthy and trim, whatever, and lean. And yet, what is it? Like some 2/3 of people are overweight or worse, right, in the US. And so just knowing it doesn't mean that we do it. So that's a huge question. Like I am not prepared to answer. But in terms of like people who are wealthy, and actually I know quite a few who like really understand this and they are spending, in fact, the conference that I just went to is a billionaire who basically spends all their time, giving money away, to like really good causes. So clearly there's some people who know this and they do it. Uh, but I guess part of it is this sort of hedonic adaptation, the hedonic treadmill, right? Is that like you get something you want and then you're like, okay, that's nice. And now you want more, you want more, you want more. And I guess I want to say again, like this is deeply human for us to constantly want more. And we probably wouldn't make as much progress as like human beings. Why did Homo sapiens like are still here? All the other Homo species are not here around, right? Maybe we wouldn't have achieved what we have if we didn't have this quality, but it also has the function of making us less happy. So anyway, I don't know the answer to that question because that's like the $1 billion question. But there's lots of things that we know if we did this more of or less of, but we still don't. Actually, one of my favorite examples, it's a silly one. Like we were talking earlier about how like how many things there are to do and we just don't have time. And so like so many of my friends, like, we're so busy, but then once in a while we're like, let's all get together, right? So let's say it's a group of like 8 people, 6 or 8 people. And finally it takes like months for everyone's schedules to like sync up. And we have like a dinner or something like, yeah, for 8 people. And we have an amazing time. And we're like, that was so amazing. Like, why don't we do this more often, right? And then we don't. And then it takes like many months again for people to like get it together again to do that. Like, it's just so obvious that we should do that more. And yet I don't know, we still don't. So anyway, there are lots of answers to that question, including about habits. And there's some really good books about habits because we need to create better habits to make these things happen.
I would love to talk a little bit about, the power of like contentment and having like enough. I just kind of think about like when we eat food, there's some people that will just kind of keep on eating because it's never enough. And then the other people that are like, okay, like my body feels full. I'm good right now. I'm happy and I'm content. And how does that play in happiness, and what role is contentment and just being like I guess it's grateful for what you have, but just content with what you have, not always seeking more.
It's such a good way of saying it. It's basically, yeah, what we were talking about before, like slowing down that hedonic treadmill, right? The hedonic adaptation that once you reach a goal, like whether it's eating something or you've reached a point in your career or something you wanted, and to just kind of like step back and like, oh, and like really savor it, right? So there's research on savoring. And savoring basically is extracting the maximum positive emotion from something. And so you reach your goal or something you want, and then you really savor it. And gratitude is very much related to that, right? Because it's part of savoring could be gratitude. And you savor it and you really enjoy it and you like sit with it and you live with it for a while before like, oh, what's the next thing? You know, yeah, it's like we always want the next thing. Yeah, it's really hard to kind of go back against those very human desires. Yeah.
I love what you just said about savoring. I think that's like the perfect word for it, is like the stopping and savoring and relishing in that moment. And that goes back to what you said about the deepening of the gratitude, the deepening with your essays. It's like you're embodying it versus like the surface, like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing. And it's not just a list, but it's really like bringing it into your body. So I love the word savoring. I'm going to be using that one a lot for myself. Last question. What would you share with people as, your last words of wisdom or advice for helping them increase their happiness or stay happy for longer periods of time based off of all of your research?
Yeah, it's a great question to end with. Thank you, by the way. It's been fun talking. Uh, so I was saying before, I think the key to everything I'm talking about is connection. And you could define that very broadly. For some people, it could be connection with God, or connection with a pet. It's usually connecting with other people. So anything you can do to strengthen and maintain connections with others. And again, it's going to look different from between an extrovert and introvert, right? So for an introvert, it could be 1 or 2 people in their lives that they're really going to focus on. For an extrovert, it might be many people. And there's so many ways that we could do that, including growing with another person, like doing something that helps you both grow together. I could be growing developing a romantic relationship, or it could be, yeah, talking. There's research on, we haven't talked about this, research on talking with strangers. Like I'm not like a chatter. And so this is actually hard for me, but it turns out that people are much happier when they just sort of say hello, smile, or chat with a stranger, whether it's a barista or someone sitting next to you on a train. And so there's something we don't do enough of that we don't realize will make us happy. So anything to do with connection makes us happy. And then the other thing I guess I want to end is with is a quote. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from William James, who's the sort of the father of psychology, and he's a philosopher. And he wrote, uh, experience is what I agree to attend to. Experience is what I agree to attend to. So it's basically all about attention. And of course, we know about with meditation and Buddhist approaches. It's all about what you're attending to determines your life. It determines your experience. So you could have lots of things going on. If you're not attending to them, it's as though they're not there. Or if you're ruminating about them all the time, then that's going to determine your life. So attention is so important. Where you direct it is maybe the most important.
Thank you.
Wow, that was so good. Thank you so much for sharing about the science of happiness. I know I've learned so much. I know Max got like a million ideas on for the Grateful Giraffes. He was like posting in the chats. He's like, we need to do this, we need to do this. This is gonna help. But the work that you're doing is so powerful, and I feel like the more research that's been done, it just not only validates that what we know in our communities, but it also gives like a blueprint for others to go ahead and be confident in following that path as well. So I want to thank you for all of your work, all of the wisdom that you shared with us today. And of course, if anybody, is interested in finding out more about your work, feel free to reach out to Sonja. She's in our WhatsApp group, and we just are very blessed and honored to have you as a part of our community. So thank you again for
Yeah, that was
today.
really great questions. I really enjoyed that conversation. Thank you all for coming. Also, if you Google my name, my email is public. So if anyone wants to reach out to me, also, I'm happy to. So thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much and have a wonderful day, everyone. Thank
Thank
you.
you.